Thank you all. Thanks for coming. Really excited to be here. Data runs the world at this point, especially runs our cities. So I'm going to be talking about some topics that are probably a little different than other days of the conference so far, kind of real world use case of data, especially as it relates to citizens and citizen hackers. So Civic Makers is a collection of makers, hackers, problem solvers, facilitators. We love to listen, we love to build community, and we're optimistic about doing better in our communities. And we're very committed to impact, which is the subject of this talk. We're a services design firm, and we help agencies, organizations, and startups define and rapidly deploy collaborative solutions for public good. These are a few of the clients that we've worked with. And our approach is in-depth experience of the sector, collaboration, and solutions focus. And really, we've been seeing over the last decade an incredible number of trends that have led us to this moment of opportunity and the work that we do. Governance is changing. How we manage our organizations, how we manage our cities, how we manage ourselves is drastically different than it was 10 years ago. There's a whole new era of government innovations from the federal level on down to the local level. How many of you heard of 18F or USDS? These are new federal level innovation agencies that are funded to improve how we deliver government services. Alongside that federal innovation and the local innovation is an explosion of community-driven solutions, referenced by the Code for America Brigade network, which is 40,000 plus citizen hackers that are trying to build solutions to improve their communities for free as volunteers. And I think the open source movement as well is really indicative of people's desire to contribute to the commons and solutions for the commons. And finally, the shifting nature of work is also, I think, indicative of how we're organizing ourselves differently. And amidst all those trends, civic technology is emerging, and the civic commons is huge. Let me just stop for a second and share my definition of civic. A lot of people think civic is the relationship of a citizen to their government, and that's certainly one of the aspects of civics. But I also like to think of civics as a relationship of citizens to each other and to the organizations that are trying to improve the civic space, how we relate to each other, and what that means for how we work together. So taken in that light, the civic commons is huge. In 2015, there was $6.9 billion spent on civic tech software. There's 5.5 million free and open source software repositories earlier this decade. And as mentioned, there's tens of thousands of hackers that are trying to contribute to solutions in the civic tech realm. But it's really an immature sector. There's informal networks and silos. There's a ton of duplicated efforts, which any of you out in the open source world probably understand. And there's wasted resources and failing investments from the VCs that have tried to dip their toes into supporting this field. And ultimately, for us, there's not enough impact. So where are all these millions of dollars of investment and hundreds of thousands of hours of person time that have been spent building? Where is it actually moving the needle on the ground? So for us, we are trying to build a framework for collaboration through the civic hacking movement, but that can be applied to any kind of work where we're trying to solve community problems. And it's a very human-centered but data-oriented approach. And really brings us to the question, how is civic tech different than normal tech? This is the startup development lifecycle, which you're probably familiar with, from problem market fit all the way to problem solution fit all the way to business model and market fit. But civic tech, there's a few different key differences which we need to take into account with how we fund and how we build software and products, but also how we build our companies. It's very sticky problems that have many different systemic actors and also many different masters, many people that we need to address. And this is a difference with government compared to the business world. Government's on the hook to serve everyone, and a company can choose who their users are. A government can't. And then also is the revenue question. There are some civic projects that may not be fundable as far as revenue streams. So this all is being expressed now through something called an ethos called build with, not for, in the civic community. This is, again, the human-centered approach to building directly in collaboration with the community you're aiming to serve instead of working on assumptions or ideas that haven't been tested and validated. If you're in the lean and agile world, that should sound kind of familiar, but it's actually kind of lacking in some of the social and mission-driven attempts out there. So this is the civic tech project lifecycle we've been working on. Very simple: discovery, alpha, beta, and live. Alpha is prototype stage. Beta is a working live production model, and live is actually at launch. For the civic world, there are a few different differences that we need to think about, especially when you're talking about handing off a solution to a government rather than having a company continue to develop that over time. So stage one, this will probably not be terribly new to all of you, but make sure they have a really strong problem statement, that you do your research and define your hypotheses and identify assumptions ahead of time, and that you prioritize the key opportunity areas. A lot of people in the civic space and the social space want to do everything all at once, and that's the classic waterfall approach, which is destined to fail. So what's the highest value that we can deliver while we iterate through and expand the solutions that we offer over time? And the discovery phase, if done well, can help to elucidate that. The alpha stage is the prototype stage, low fidelity prototypes that you put in front of users to get feedback and help to define the MVP that you'll eventually roll out. And this is also in the civic hacking space where one starts to create a project plan and assemble a team. And there are some basic project management skills that are lacking that we need to be addressing as well. And I'll just take a stop, I'm pause, and I see one of my fellow Code for San Francisco Brigade members out there, and I'm really talking about some of our experience that we see week to week, working with a bunch of volunteers that have really high hopes and deep passion, but not some of the experience working across the entire project life cycle. So we're trying to really foster that best practices approach in the civic hacking movement. Finally, when you're ready, build something. But only when you're ready, only when you know exactly what you're building and who you're building it for and how you're providing value. Defining success and performance, obviously you can improve what you measure, and securing a government and community partner is really important. And certainly in the open data world, these are the folks that have the data to begin with. So it could be a government agency, it could be a nonprofit that manages social services, but finding these partners and helping them through their data is a really key part of the civic hacking and civic tech space. And always analyze, get your analytics in there. Finally, the live stage is the launch and handoff. And I mentioned before, this is where you actually give the technology over to your partner. And what are the expectations there? Are they expected to maintain it? Or are you going to support that? Is there funding to maintain it? So this is a break point for a lot of projects where there's just not the sort of long-term scoping that's necessary to continue a sustainable a reliable tool, especially if this is a tool being developed to serve the needs of community partners and citizens. I think it's also always important to do a debrief and evaluation, maintenance and scalability plan, and then basically go back to the beginning, start over. You know, what's the new problem statement? What's the new discovery and research you do? So this is the basic plan that we've been working with at Code for San Francisco, and this is kind of a summary of that. But there are a couple of problems that we've realized, and this is where I want to spend the rest of the talk just talking a little bit about how we're trying to improve this process, and then I'll open it up for questions about what's happening in the civic tech space if you're interested. Understanding the problem statement is a huge hurdle for really anyone trying to create a solution. In the software world, if you don't get the right problem statement, you're not going to provide value and your company's going to fail. You're never going to get to that growth phase. You're never going to get that funding to ramp up. In the civic space, you can keep hacking away and providing something of marginal value, and you can kind of convince yourself that you're not really working on the right problem. So we've identified this as an area where we need to take a step back and really do more listening and more what we're calling co-discovery. The other piece is on the, in broad strokes, on the other end of the spectrum. Once something is live, who knows about it, and how can you share what you've learned with other people working in other communities so that they can take what you've done and repurpose it, or they can basically just shortcut some of their work. And we see so much duplication right now through the good efforts and intentions of the civic hacking space. And again, I'll say that I think this also exists in the open source space as well. So how do we address that? And it's kind of an open question. So the problem statement definition, taking really just before we even come up with a solution, what are we working on? A problem statement definition is just not possible without input from individuals, communities, and institutions. It could be the unit of focus could be a human or it could be a system. But it's really important to identify that up front. Are you trying to serve people on the ground that have a problem, or are you trying to help the service providers that are addressing that problem? Two very different use cases and ways to go about having impact. And really importantly, is there a government entity or NGO that's already working on this problem, and how can you partner with them? So taking all of this from an impact and a social lens broadly, we live in an ecology of forces and variables that are systemic. And so we need to think about them as we do this work. And we can get a lot of help and support from folks that have tried over the last 10 or 20 years different approaches. Maybe not with the innovation or human-centered design approaches that we can bring, but it's really important to think about the system that's been addressing these problems in the past. Secondary research is that landscape of analysis, who's been doing this work, and determining the magnitude of the problem and the opportunity. And then we're really getting to the heart of the matter here with the primary research that needs to happen to validate a problem statement, which is hitting the streets, talking to people. That could be the individual, that could be interviews with service providers. And so we've been prototyping what that looks like, that co-discovery process. This is something that we just did last week at Code for San Francisco. On the right, you'll see the team of folks that went out in front of the public library to get their feedback on an idea called Portfolio in the Cloud to address some of the struggles that people that are job hunting but don't necessarily have the advantages that you or I have, understanding how Google Drive works, or being able to be able to keep a flash drive or store the images of their work and their resume over time. So they were trying to validate some of the ideas that they had and really understand the problem that exists for these folks. And it really is a very powerful way. I know this is it can be also really challenging to actually talk to real users, and I think there is amongst us technologists a reticence sometimes to get into this work, this dirty work. Sometimes it's easy to just think about the data, and I'm all for that, but I think the quantitative has to be balanced with the qualitative, and that's what we're working on with this co-discovery process. And the best practices for co-discovery are really taking yourself out of your own perspective, removing your assumptions, and being open. And that lets you immerse yourself in the context of the user that you're trying to serve. And you're only going to be as effective as you are able to understand the worldview and the real needs of the audience and the users you're trying to help. And then again, partner with community ambassadors. And you can see that this is a very diverse crowd of folks. And when you're going out to talking to people, sometimes the focus group approach is really, or your typical market research approach can be really intimidating. So how do you do this in a way that is open and embraces other people, and having a diverse and welcoming set of folks can help to do that when talking to the community through user interviews. So the other piece I shared, and I'll wrap up here and then open it up for questions, is the knowledge sharing piece in the civic space is really abysmal right now. And that's everything from who's working on what and who they're trying to serve and what's already been tried, to the data around impact and what we can learn from that. So we've experimented with a few different ideas, but it's not really clear what the right solution is. Is it more hackathons? Is it more Code for America brigades to get people coming together, in-person communication? Is it like single-person integrators that know the space, that can make the connections? Or is it a Stack Overflow for civic tech or a marketplace for civic innovation? It might be all these things, but I think to really see impact scale, and we're going to need the data from what's already been tried, what's currently being tried, and what's working, so that we can basically be more effective moving forward, because there's an incredible opportunity right now to harness what the world of Silicon Valley has delivered as far as usability, user experience, and convenience. And there's a lot of people very steeped in that knowledge that want to help. We see it in the movement for Bernie Sanders. We see it in the civic hacking space. And we're going to see more of it, but we're only going to see it as so far as there's impact. So how do we focus on that impact, and how do we improve? That's what Civic Makers is working on. And if you'd like to talk about any of the specific projects, if you have questions about what's happening in the civic and government technology space in the Bay Area, I've been in that space for about 10 years and happy to share. We're always interested in people coming out to the Code for San Francisco Weekly Hack Night. There's a lot of open data in the Bay Area, and we're trying to uncover more every day. So it's an open invitation to get involved with collaboration for civic impact. Thank you. Any questions?
Thank you very much, Lawrence. We're going to take questions. We are a very small group, so don't hesitate. I think you were first.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, Lawrence. I saw your in part of your coming up with and fleshing out the problem statement, this idea of looking at the landscape, which I think is interesting. You know, who else has sort of done some digging here? Who else has tried to get at this?
Yeah.
Have you kind of yourselves developed sort of a methodology for doing that? I think that really is a lot of like the Googling grunt work oftentimes.
Yeah.
What does that look like for you guys, and what kind of process do you go through for that particular kind of dig on a project?
Yeah, this is an interesting question, and we actually prototyped a marketplace for civic technology and civic projects, and we're still playing around with that idea. That's one approach, and it's been tried before. Code for America actually created something called Civic Commons, and the idea was to have a listing of all the open source tools that governments could deploy. It never took off. It was defunded, and it was kind of a ghost town. And I think the real question is, what are the incentives for people to share? Everyone, I mean, you go into GitHub, a README file is a very hard thing to come by. So if people can't even put a fleshed out README file in their GitHub repo, how are they going to actually meaningfully share what stage they're at, what impact they're seeing, and what they've tried? So we think a lot about, again, the incentives. Is there a way that we can create some kind of reciprocity? If you share something, do you get something in return? There, and I hate to use this word, but sort of like the gamification approach. There is a way that we're all trying to play together. So what does sharing your experience get you in return? So that we're sort of fooling around with that. There's no real like solid solution that I've seen, but would love to chat more with you about that if you have some ideas.
It seems like a shame, right? Because the academic world, the civic tech world, there's so many spaces where, wow, wouldn't it be great if
Yeah.
you was doing the same thing that we did?
Yeah, and I think that there is more of there's a lot of people in the academic world and the corporate world, working on the same ideas. It would be great if we can understand what that is. There is more of a concerted effort to do a cross-disciplinary approach, so bringing academic, corporate, and government together and cataloging those in a more rigorous scientific approach. There's a new lab here called Super Public Labs. There's a CUSP lab in New York City. So there are some efforts. This is still very nascent. Civic tech as a term has only been around for 3 or 4 years. I mean, it was eGov and Gov 2.0 before that. But yeah, something will come up, and it could be just simple like a Q&A forum. We've thought about just posting a clone of Stack Overflow and seeing how that might help. But yeah, it's a good question. So another question in the back.
Yeah, I liked seeing you hitting the streets in San Francisco. I wonder if you've had the experience that in San Francisco, everybody is pitched with new technology, and like if you've made an effort to get to elsewhere in the country, and if they're more receptive out there, or less.
For sure. So one key difference here is we're not pitching anybody, we're listening. So it's not, absolutely hear you. I have a friend that's developing a new, what is it? Are you talking to me on a call about it this morning? Like a new inflatable chair that you can have a beer koozie. And he was out at Beta Breakers and they had a few out and people were just rushing to check it out. And that was his market research in a way. That's the best kind because you're pulling people in instead of pushing out. And so there is a dynamic when you're pushing a pitch on somebody. But in this case, I think this is really important. The language, the framing, the messaging, the messengers. We want to listen. Are you having problems posting a resume to get new work? What does that feel like? What struggles are you having? What have you tried? That's very different than, do you want to try my new portfolio in the cloud? And that'll happen, but that might happen in a more curated kind of fashion. So that's one thing. And then the other sort of answer I'll give is that there is a trend towards what's called a civic user testing group. Chicago has a really great one. It's called, out of the Smart Chicago Collaborative, called the CUT Group. And they've gotten foundation funding to have a regular list of users that they can just go out and test civic and GovTech tools. And they have this great map where they show how many users per county and per district, what the diversity is. So I'm working on doing something like that here in the Bay Area, not just San Francisco, but Oakland and Berkeley and Hayward, so that we can have access to the community directly to listen more easily. but the last thing I'll say is that if a solution is going to work, it has to be community focused and local. So there is a tension there as far as where you go to find the answers you need. Yeah.
We have time for one more question.
You mentioned best practices or best cases. You probably already know some, like change.org, or which technologies are already working in.
Best practices regarding the project lifecycle. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because I would say the CUT group, the Civic user testing, there are a number of best practices that have emerged out of there, and that's the early kind of, so the user testing is once you already have a solution and you need to understand how it's working as far as a usability perspective. I would say there's less best practices around the co-discovery piece, and so the idea of using human-centered design to develop a government service is very new. So that's an emergent set of best practices that I and us and a bunch of others are thinking about. And then, when you get into, I used to work at change.org, so, they have a whole set of best practices around engagement, which is a whole other discipline. So it really depends on what part of the life cycle you're talking about. And actually, it'd be an interesting question is like, what are the best practices for a specific part of the life cycle? And then that will be emergent as well. So, thank you very much. Thank you all.
Thank you.